If you've ever felt exhausted even when you're doing everything right, this episode is for you. Because sometimes the thing keeping you stuck isn't lack of discipline, motivation, or capability. It's a survival pattern that's quietly directing your attention away from the future you're trying to create. Welcome to Breakthrough Weekly. I'm your host, Monica Pelayo. Every week, we go beneath the surface of what's keeping you stuck, not to the symptoms, but to where it actually started. If you're new here, welcome. If you're returning, thank you for being back. Today's episode is titled The Hidden Cost of Survival Mode, where focus goes, energy flows. Let's begin. Last Sunday, I returned home after spending several weeks in Santa Monica. Within a few days, I noticed something I couldn't ignore. Not because Santa Monica is perfect, and not because responsibilities disappeared while I was there, but because the contrast between the two environments was impossible to miss. While I was there, I walked almost every day. Some days I covered 2 to 4 miles without giving it much thought. Coffee shops, restaurants, grocery stores, the beach, and parks were all within walking distance. The environment naturally encouraged movement, but what stood out most wasn't the walking, it was the space. Space to think, space to breathe, space to reflect, space to imagine what I wanted my future to look like. When I returned home, reality came rushing back. Schedules, the responsibilities, the noise, the interruptions, the constant demands on my attention. Within hours of arriving, my grandchildren wanted to spend time together after not seeing me for a month. They were excited, and I was excited to see them too. At the same time, I had come home feeling under the weather and needing rest. The following days brought more of what many families experience: children homesick, sibling arguments, constant questions, requests, and the normal demands of everyday life. Then I noticed something else. The cravings return, the snacking return, the mental chatter return. How do I grow the business that supports the life I want to live? What needs to get done? What am I forgetting? What's next? What struck me was that none of these challenges were new. They had followed me to Santa Monica and were waiting for me when I returned home. The difference wasn't the circumstance themselves, the difference was that I had the space to focus. In Santa Monica, I wasn't constantly being pulled in multiple directions. I had more uninterrupted time to think, work on my business, reflect on my goals, and focus on the future I wanted to create. The responsibilities were still there. They just weren't competing for my attention every few minutes. Maybe you recognize this feeling. You tell yourself you'll focus on your goals once things calm down, once the project is finished, once the kids need less from you, once the finances feel more stable, once life becomes less demanding. Yet somehow that moment never arrives. There's always another urgent thing demanding your attention. The moment you sit down to think about your future, your mind pulls you back to today's problems. The moment you consider making a change, a quiet voice whispers, "Is this really the right time? Am I really ready for this?" If so, what I'm about to share isn't just my story, it might be yours too. Because what I discovered had very little to do with Santa Monica itself. It had everything to do with patterns I already knew existed, but had become so automatic that I sometimes missed how much they were still shaping my thoughts, decisions, and attention. Looking back, I can clearly see how much my career shaped the way I approach life. For more than 20 years, I supported executive leadership at Intel. During my time in the CEO office, my primary responsibility was coordinating travel for the CEO while also providing backup support to the CEO executive assistant and supporting the broader needs of the office. It was an environment with very little room for error. Success depended on anticipating needs, identifying potential issues before they ever became problems, and staying several steps ahead. But it wasn't just a proactive environment, it was an urgent one. Priorities change constantly. New requests appear without warning. What seemed important in the morning could be replaced by something far more urgent an hour later. A significant part of my role involved accessing changing situations, reprioritizing quickly, and determining what required immediate attention. The question running in the background was almost always the same. What is the most urgent thing that needs to happen right now? The mindset served me well. Many of the opportunities, recognition, and success I experienced throughout my career were directly connected to those abilities. Those skills weren't weakness, they were strengths. What Santa Monica helped me see, however, is how easily those patterns can continue running long after we've left the environment that created them. Here's something most people don't realize: the conscious mind, the part you use to make decisions, have conversations, and read this article, is only a small fraction of what's actually driving your behavior. The far greater influence comes from the subconscious mind, the part that runs in the background, quietly managing everything it has learned, stored, and decided over the course of your life. It doesn't think in logic, it thinks in patterns. Its primary job is not to make you happy or successful. Its primary job is to keep you safe. Early in life, we have experiences that teach us something about the world. Some of those lessons are helpful, others are not. But the subconscious mind doesn't evaluate them, it simply records them, files them away, and begins running them automatically whenever it encounters a situation that feels familiar. Think of it like software that was installed when you were young. It runs in the background whether you're aware of it or not. And unless something updates the code, it keeps producing the same output, the same reactions, the same patterns, the same limitations, regardless of how much has changed in your life since it was first installed. More importantly, the mind is programmed for survival. If it perceives something as a threat, it will prioritize protection first. This is an important function because it helps keep us safe. The challenge arises when protection consumes so much of our attention that there is little room left for growth, possibility, or creating the future we want. This is why logic alone is often not enough to create change. Consciously, you may want the promotion, the business, the relationship, or the new opportunity. But if the subconscious mind associates that goal with rejection, failure, judgment, embarrassment, or emotional pain, it will often override those conscious desires in an effort to keep you safe. In my case, 20 plus years in a high urgency environment didn't just teach me skills, it reinforced a way of being. My subconscious mind learned urgency is normal, vigilance is safe, and staying ahead of problems is what keeps things from falling apart. So when I returned home from Santa Monica, my subconscious didn't wait for instructions. It simply picked up where it left off. The cravings, the mental chatter, the scanning for what's next, those weren't personal failures. They were programs running exactly as designed. Of all the things the subconscious mind struggles with, uncertainty may be the most powerful trigger. Early in my role, coordinating travel for the CEO, uncertainty was one of my biggest challenges. Many of the meetings we supported, especially government meetings, didn't come together until days before the trip. At times, part of the itinerary were still evolving while the CEO was already traveling. Information arrived late, plans changed without warning. What felt confirmed in the morning could shift completely by the afternoon. In response, we prepared for every possible scenario. The chief of staff and the travel program manager often developed multiple contingency plans. And because I understood the importance of being prepared for changing circumstances, I fully embraced that approach. Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. I wanted every variable accounted for and every contingency covered. The more uncertainty there was, the more preparation was required. And the more preparation was required, the more time it consumed until managing potential scenarios was taking up the majority of my energy. At the time, I believed that level of preparation was simply what the role required. Looking back, I can see something I couldn't see then. The real issue wasn't the uncertainty itself, the real issue was the uncertainty met. Most of us don't consciously recognize this. We don't walk around thinking, my sense of worth is being threatened. That's not how subconscious beliefs show up. Instead, they show up as thoughts. I can't make a mistake. Everything has to be perfect. I need more information. I have to get this right. For years, I believed that those thoughts were simply part of being responsible and thorough. Through my own personal growth work and later through my training in hypnosis and RTT, I came to understand that many of those thoughts were being driven by something deeper. At the time, I was still carrying a need to prove my value, to prove my capability, to prove I was enough. The pressure wasn't just about making the trip successful, the pressure was about protecting my sense of worth. Uncertainty was threatening because if something went wrong, a part of me feared it would confirm what I was working so hard to disprove, that I wasn't capable, that I wasn't enough. And in an environment where I was sometimes relying on country managers and external teams for critical information, people whose accuracy I couldn't fully control, the stakes felt even higher. If something failed, I was the one accountable. This is what makes subconscious beliefs so powerful and so invisible. They don't announce themselves, they hide inside the habits we've come to accept as just who we are or how we work. Over preparation, perfectionism, the need to double check everything, staying in motion so there's no room to sit with doubt. These aren't character flaws. For most people, they're adaptations, strategies the subconscious mind developed to manage a core belief that it was unsafe to be exposed as not enough. Looking back, I saw the same pattern repeatedly while mentoring executive assistants. Many would outperform when supporting a new leader, becoming available at all hours, responding immediately to every request, and taking on more than was sustainable. I often cautioned them about this. One of the lessons I shared was that the level of support you provide early on often becomes the expectation. What starts as an effort to prove yourself can quickly become the standard by which your performance is measured. On the surface, it looked like dedication. Underneath, it was often uncertainty and a desire to demonstrate their value. They wanted to establish trust, prove they were capable, and show their leader they could be relied upon. The challenge was that once that expectation was established, pulling back could feel like underperforming, even when the original level of effort was never sustainable in the first place. Different behavior, same underlying need to prove worth. And here's the part that matters most: uncertainty doesn't just make us anxious in the moment when a belief system is tied to worth. Uncertainty becomes the single greatest threat to growth because every new opportunity, every uncharted path, every step towards something bigger arrives wrapped in the unknown. And if the unknown feels dangerous, the mind will find every reason to stay exactly where it is. The challenge is that we can't change a pattern we don't recognize. What makes these patterns particularly challenging is that they often serve a purpose. The need to prepare, anticipate problems, stay ahead, and focus on what could go wrong. These strategies helped me succeed. The problem wasn't that they existed, the problem was when they began consuming so much of my attention that there was little left for anything else. That's the hidden cost of survival mode. Not that it protects us, that it can quietly monopolize the attention we also need for growth. One of the primary functions of the mind is to keep us safe. Because of that, the mind is constantly looking for ways to survive and avoid perceived threats. One of the ways it does this is by relying on what is familiar. Familiarity becomes a coping mechanism because the mind already knows how to navigate it. It doesn't have to guess, it doesn't have to adapt, it doesn't have to risk the unknown. The challenge is that the mind doesn't distinguish between what is familiar and what is beneficial. It simply recognizes what has helped us survive before and attempts to repeat it. Why? Because the goal is survival. Familiarity is a strategy. A new opportunity, building a business, putting yourself out there, creating a different future, all of it is unfamiliar. And one of the reasons growth can feel so difficult is that the mind wasn't designed to prioritize growth. It was designed to prioritize survival. Thousands of years ago, unfamiliar situations carried real risk. Eating an unfamiliar plant could make you sick. Walking an unfamiliar path could expose you to danger. Being separated from your tribe could threaten your survival. Because of that, the mind learned to associate familiarity with safety, not because familiar was always better, but because familiar was known. The challenge is that while the world has changed, many of the mind's protective mechanisms have not. Today, building a business won't threaten your survival. Applying for a promotion won't threaten your survival. Speaking up in a meeting won't threaten your survival. But if those situations trigger uncertainty, rejection, judgment, failure, or embarrassment, the subconscious mind can respond as though a threat exists. Not because it's trying to hold you back, because it's trying to protect you. If someone carries a deep belief, I'm not enough, growth itself can feel threatening because growth creates exposure. It creates the possibility of failure, judgment, rejection, or mistakes. For a mind that is already trying to protect itself, staying with what is familiar can feel safer than moving toward what is possible. This is why so many intelligent, capable people find themselves stuck. It isn't a lack of ambition, it isn't laziness, it isn't even fear in the way we usually think of it. It's a subconscious belief system that is working exactly as if it was designed to work, just toward the protection instead of possibility. I've seen this pattern in professionals pursuing promotions, entrepreneurs building businesses, and individuals trying to create meaningful change in their lives. The challenge is rarely capability. More often, it's subconscious belief system that has learned to prioritize protection over possibility. And yet, protection and possibility are not opposites. We need both. The challenge is making sure protection doesn't become the only thing directing our attention, because while survival helps us manage today's reality, growth helps us create tomorrow. What Santa Monica highlighted for me wasn't just how much mental energy goes into managing responsibilities, it showed me where my attention was going. The biggest realization wasn't that Santa Monica changed me, it was that it gave me enough distance from urgency to see how much of my attention was being consumed by survival. And in that space, I was able to reconnect with the person I was already becoming. The work had already begun long before I arrived. The personal growth, the mindset work, the self awareness, and the willingness to challenge old patterns were already there. What changed was the environment. Instead of constantly reacting, I had more opportunities to reflect. The urgent things were still there. The difference was that they weren't consuming all of my attention. For the first time in a long time, I had enough space to focus on what was possible alongside what was necessary. Instead of asking how I was going to get through the week, I found myself thinking about the future I wanted to create. That distinction matters because environments don't create transformation by themselves, but they can either support it or compete with it. And that's when I began paying closer attention to where my focus was actually going. For years, I worked in environments where success depended on identifying what was urgent and responding quickly. That skill was valuable, but it also trained my attention. The question running in the background was often what needs my attention right now. The challenge is that the future we're trying to create rarely shows up as urgent. Building a business, working on your mindset, creating a vision for your future, none of these show up as urgent today. Most growth activates don't demand immediate attention, which means they often get pushed to the bottom of the list while urgency continues to win. The question we ask determines where that focus lands. If we're constantly asking what could go wrong, what we're missing, and where the risks are, our attention naturally moves towards protection. If we also begin asking what's possible, what we want to create, and who we want to become, our attention begins to move toward growth. Growth often begins when we learn how to make room for both. One thing I've come to appreciate is that the goal isn't to eliminate survival mode. Survival serves an important purpose. The challenge is that survival mode naturally narrows our focus toward what feels urgent, familiar, and necessary for protection. That's useful when we're responding to a real problem, but if we're not aware it's happening, survival can unintentionally limit our ability to see possibilities, opportunities, and choices that are equally important to our future. The question isn't whether survival is present, The question is whether we're allowing it to become the only thing directing our attention. The mind will always prioritize what it believes is safest. Change becomes possible when we update what the mind believes is true. Over time, my relationship with uncertainty began to change, not all at once, and not from reading about it. It happened gradually through intentional work on what I actually believed about myself. As that work deepened, I noticed something changing in how I operated. The same uncertainty that used to send me into overdrive began to feel different. There was still stress, still the pressure of wanting things to go well, but it no longer felt like a verdict on my worth. At some point, I started pushing back on the need to maintain multiple plans at once. Rather than spending time and energy preparing for every possible outcome, I began encouraging the team to focus on Plan A and pivot when circumstances required it. That shift wasn't about becoming less professional, it was partially about recognizing that the constant planning, replanning, and management of multiple scenarios wasn't always the best use of time and energy. But it was also about something deeper. I was beginning to trust myself to handle whatever came next, not because I had eliminated the unknown, but because I no longer needed to. Instead of trying to control every possible outcome, I was leaning and learning to trust my ability to adapt and navigate uncertainty as it unfolded. That's the difference belief work makes. It's not about thinking more positively on the surface, it's about updating what the mind believes it is true at its core. The old conclusions formed long ago, often in moments of stress and vulnerability, that have been quietly shaping your decisions, your reactions, and your relationship with uncertainty ever since. When the belief changes, the behavior changes, not by force, but naturally. The over preparation loses its grip, the mental chatter quiets, the need to prove yourself through perfection softens, not because you're forced yourself to change, but because the subconscious mind is no longer running a program that requires those responses. Before you move on, take a moment to reflect on the following. Where is most of your attention going? Toward managing today's problems or toward creating tomorrow's possibilities? If you find yourself constantly overthinking, over preparing, procrastinating, staying stuck, or feeling like you're always reacting instead of intentionally creating the life you want, it may not be a motivation problem. It may not even be a time management problem. Many of these patterns are driven by subconscious beliefs and protective strategies that were created long ago and are still operating in the background today, quietly influencing the decisions you make, the risks you take, the possibilities you allow yourself to pursue. The challenge is that we can't change what we don't recognize, and what we can't recognize, we've never been given the tools to see. This week, pay attention to where your attention is going. Notice what feels urgent. Notice what consistently gets pushed aside. Notice where most of the mental energy is being spent and ask yourself, am I giving enough attention to the future I'm trying to create? Awareness is often the first step towards change. If you're curious about what might be driving your own patterns, you may be surprised to discover that the issue isn't a lack of motivation, discipline, or willpower. Often it's an outdated belief system that no longer reflects who you are today. When a subconscious belief is driving the behavior, the solution isn't trying harder, it's understanding what's happening beneath the surface. Sometimes the issue isn't that we're doing something wrong. Sometimes we're simply spent too much time focusing on survival that we lost sight of the patterns directing our attention. If you're curious to explore what's really keeping you stuck, I invite you to schedule a complimentary exploratory call. We'll discuss what's been holding you back, what you'd like to achieve, and whether my approach is the right fit for your goals. The purpose of my work is to help clients identify and address the subconscious patterns and beliefs that might be influencing their thoughts, behaviors, and results so they can move forward with greater confidence, clarity, and attention. Schedule your complimentary exploratory call at www.thethrivingpathways.com/appointment. If something in this episode felt familiar, not just a story, but as a pattern you recognize in your own life, that recognition matters. The subconscious doesn't surface what it isn't ready to see. If it came up, it's worth paying attention to. Thank you for spending this time with me. If someone came to mind while you were listening, that's not a coincidence. Send this episode to them. New episodes drop every Monday. Subscribe so you don't miss next week's Breakthrough Weekly. I'm Monica Pelayo, and I'll see you next time.